it's hard to think about this because we're so used to being advertised to, we're so used to lots and lots of branding, that we forget that a great many objects in our lives are purely utilitarian. There are some objects that we have that are purely utilitarian that we don't think of in the same way as we think of other objects. When you get on an airplane, right, that little white pillow, nobody I know, or at least I hope nobody I know, gets off a plane and looks at that little white pillow and goes, oh, I wish I could take you with me, right? No, we're just using it for a little bit of time and we're leaving it behind, right? It's not grandma's embroidered pillow, it's a little white airplane pillow, right? We have in certain circumstances a very cold, hard, rational way of thinking about things. But then ask somebody about the refrigerator, and in an era where there's been no doubt millions of dollars spent on branding refrigerators, people get very emotional, right? Well, if you think about it, there's no reason why we shouldn't treat household appliances exactly the same way as we treat airplane pillows, and really separate out what is meaningful to us and what we have a meaningful relationship to as objects from everything else. Because if you can do that, it's possible to forge a relationship where the producers of these objects are not selling you a refrigerator that you're going to have for life, as if you've made a lifelong commitment, but rather a thing you're using, a service, right? Refrigeration services, which again, as Amory Lovins says, what we really want is cold beer, not a refrigerator. So if somebody can sell us refrigeration services and give us the latest refrigerator and update it on a regular basis and take back all of the other stuff, it changes the deal. It changes the way we use things. It gets us better stuff turned over more frequently. But more importantly, it changes the way producers design things. Because if you've got to take something back, let me tell you, this phone, and this is probably the 10th cell phone I've had in my life, it is not recyclable, right? Even if I dropped it in an electronic recycling bin, chances are it would just get ground up and pulped. We might melt some of the materials out. If we got really unlucky, it might get sent to China where kids would pick apart the precious metals and sell them back. But in general, this is junk, toxic junk. It cannot be redeemed. However, if Motorola had to take this phone back, you'd better believe they would be designing it in a different way, because they would not want hundreds of millions of pieces of junk returning to them. So, for example, they might design it like this cell phone, which when brought to high heat pops apart. The adhesives come unglued, the screws have memory core in them, and they unthread themselves, and the whole thing can be recycled and reused. With producer takebacks, with that kind of relationship to stuff, all sorts of design innovations become profitable. You start to have things like this cradle-to-cradle chair, or carpets you give back, like Interface's floor carpets, or office furniture you recycle. Even office paper can become a service instead of a thing. There's this great program in London called Local Paper for London, where everyone in your little area who's recycling their paper, that paper gets taken away, recycled, brought back as new office supplies to the same people who just sent that fiber back, right? So you can print next week's memo on last week's memo, which probably is an improvement for everyone. And if we can imagine building an entire economy that operates in that closed-loop way, dematerializing waste, facilitating good choices, we start to see opportunities everywhere. For instance, we can imagine building retail for people who are shopping for things that are going to be in their lives briefly, who have no cars but who are really wired up, right? Sadly, the company that came up with this concept just went out of business, but it's a great concept. It's from the clothing company Now, and it's their idea of web fronts. When you went into one of their stores, they had one of each item. You could buy that item and take it with you at a premium if you really needed a jacket right then, right? Or you could simply order that item online through their store, go home, and it would be delivered to you, and you'd get a savings. Why would you get a savings? Well, you would get a savings because you're saving them materials, right? They don't have lots and lots of inventory stacking up about to go to waste. They don't have to ship stuff everywhere. They don't need stores that are as big, right? And that's saving them money, right? So it's a win-win-win for everybody involved, unless you need a jacket right then, in which case you just pay a little more. And they'll have another one there in the store the next day. And delivery is green. It can get a lot greener. It's much, much better to have a UPS truck dropping off 100 packages to 100 people than having 100 people drive to the store to each get one package, right? And we're getting better and better and better. There's packaging itself is getting to a point that it can be reused, much more sustainably produced. There are really great services, like the German Postal Service has these pack stations, so if you live in an apartment and you don't want people leaving a lot of packages on your stoop, you can just take one of these boxes and the people drop the stuff there and you just pick it up on your way home with a little swipe card. You know, and there are models of sharing that are really changing, and that could change, again, the way we interact with stuff. So, you know, here's an example, another example. It's bag, borrow, or steal, where you can share high-end handbags and other accessories, right? And the motto is show off, send back, right? And, you know, there's no reason why we couldn't have lots and lots and lots of storefronts that facilitate access to high-end goods that have minimal ecological impact that are fun to use. And, you know, there's this thing that's happening where the idea of transparency is spreading, right? So you have Method Brand. You know, they have their People Against Dirty campaign where people, you know, clean in the buff, and it's sort of showing you that what's in their products is so benign that you could use it, you know, even naked. What it's referencing, though, is something very powerful that's going on behind the scenes, which is that people want to know where things came from. They want to know what's in the products they're using. They want to know who made them, under what conditions. They want to see the supply chain, which has always been something that only, you know, a fraction of 1% of people ever cared about, basically the people who are in charge of making it happen. Right now, people want to know that, and the technology exists to actually show them that. Right? It's changing already the way we think about buying things. So we have things like the Freitag bag, right, which is made out of cargo tarps that have been recycled, and you go online and you pick the specific tarp you want a bag made out of, and you pick the cut that you want, and it cuts it out, and you know that you just got, you know, whatever, you know, an Einstein shipping tarp made into your bag, right? But it goes a lot farther than that. We're starting to realize that it's possible to tag products with all sorts of information. Now, we might not get an ecological nutrition label like this that tells us everything about a product, but there are lots and lots and lots of ways in which these things are happening. I heard an interesting anecdote the other day. I was talking to a woman in a toy store, asking her about the recent ban, the ban that was recently passed on toys with certain toxic components in it. And she pointed out to me that they are now labeling in the toy store which toys have no toxics at all. So they're going far, far ahead of the state ban because they recognize that people are going to want to know, is this one of those bad ones or not? And they'd better get ahead of the curve. Now, of course, that's going to help the toys that are non-toxic over the toys that are marginally toxic that are still permitted. And it goes a lot farther than that, because technology and transparency activism are combining to rip the lid off a lot of really awful things. So think about rainforest wood. Think about all the campaigns that have happened recently to expose people who are selling rainforest wood. Think about sweatshops. Think about Nike and Kathy Lee Gifford, right? Think blood diamonds. Here's a huge commodity that crashed through the floor because a tiny little group of people, fewer people than are in this room, in London, decided that they were going to show people that many diamonds come from death camps worked by slaves in the Congo, or at least a significant number. And they basically destroyed the diamond market for a while. Now things are changing. And these are just the tip of the iceberg. Think about Abu Ghraib. Think about what one set of photographs did. And no one is immune. We're seeing you know, all sorts of places where the powerful attempt to dodge out of their responsibilities, and people pursue them. So you have the Blair Watch Project, where Tony Blair tried to cut media access while he was in the middle of an election. And the Guardian newspaper asked people all over the country to take video footage and and still pictures on their cell phones of him, and basically got continuous coverage of Tony Blair.